Welcome to Simpler Bible, a daily journey to biblical understanding. 1 Samuel, here we are, episode 81, 1 Samuel 23 and 24, David spares Saul. Remember, Saul's whole purpose is to kill David, and David is going to spare Saul. Spoilers, right? I'm giving away the end of the story, but it's a great story. It's going to happen twice. More spoilers, sorry. It's going to happen twice in this narrative. But let's pick up in chapter 23 of 1 Samuel, beginning in verse 1. Now they told David, behold, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah and are robbing the threshing floors. Therefore David inquired of the Lord, and he does this frequently. David inquired of the Lord, shall I go and attack the Philistines? And the Lord said to David, go and attack the Philistines, save Keilah. But David's men said to him, behold, we're afraid here in Judah. How much more then if we go to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines? So David's men are afraid in Judah because they're being hunted by Saul and his army. David inquired of the Lord again. And the Lord answered him again, arise and go to Keilah, for I will give the Philistines into your hand. David and his men went down to Keilah. They fought with the Philistines and brought away all their livestock and struck them with a great blow. So David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. Now you would think that these people would be appreciative of that. However, they are not. When Abiathar, the son of Abimelech, had fled to David to Keilah, he had come down with an ephod in his hand. So he has the ephod, which contained the Urim and the Thummim, which we don't know exactly what those do. Remember that? But he fled King Saul and he came to David. And so he has this to seek the Lord. Now it was told Saul that David had come to Keilah, and Saul said, God has given them into my hands, for he has shut himself in by entering a town that has gates and bars. And Saul summoned all the people to go to war, to go down to Keilah to besiege David and his men. David knew that Saul was plotting harm against him, and he said to Abiathar the priest, bring the ephod here. And then David said, O Lord, the God of Israel, your servant has surely heard that Saul seeks to come to Keilah to destroy the city on my account. Will the men of Keilah surrender me into his hand? Will Saul come down as your servant has heard, O Lord, the God of Israel? Please let your servant know. And the Lord said, he will come down. And David said, will the men of Keilah surrender me and my men into the hand of Saul? And the Lord said, yes, they will surrender you. And David and his men, who were about 600, arose and departed from Keilah, and they went wherever they could go. When Saul was told that David had escaped Keilah, he gave up the expedition. And David remained in the stronghold in the wilderness, in the hill country of the wilderness of Ziph. The Ziphites are going to be a thorn in David's side pretty soon. And Saul sought him every day, but God did not give him into his hand. So Saul is hunting David every day. David saw that Saul had come to seek out his life, and David was in the wilderness of Ziph at Horesh, and Jonathan, Saul's son, I told you about this a couple of days ago, Jonathan, Saul's son, rose and went to David at Horesh and strengthened his hand in God. So I want you to check this out, that Saul and his army are hunting David and his 600 men, and Jonathan's with Saul. Jonathan, it says that Saul is seeking David every day, but God does not give David into Saul's hand. Jonathan knows right where David is and comes and meets with David. He could have led his father there, but of course Jonathan and David have made a covenant to one another to honor the Lord and to guard one another. So Jonathan Saul comes to David, and listen to what he says in verse 17. Do not fear, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find you. You shall be king over Israel, and I will be next to you. Saul my father also knows this. And the two of them made a covenant before the Lord. David remained at Horesh, and Jonathan went home. Then the Ziphites went up to Saul at Gibeah. Saul is back home, saying, is not David hiding among us in the strongholds of Horesh, the hill country of Hachilah, which is south of Jeshimon? Now come down, O king, according to all your heart's desire to come down, and on our part we will surrender him into the king's hand. So as I told you, the Ziphites are going to be against David, and they're going to surrender him into the hand of Saul. Saul said, may you be blessed by the Lord, for you have had compassion on me. Yet go make sure that you know exactly where he is, see where his foot is, and who has seen him there. For it is told to me that he is very cunning. See therefore and take note of all the lurking places where he hides, and come back to me with sure information, and then I will go with you, and if he is in the land, I will search him out among all the thousands of Judah. And they arose, and they went to Ziph ahead of Saul. Now David and his men were in the wilderness of Maon, in the Arabah south of Jeshimon, and Saul and his men went to seek David, and David was told, and he went down to the rock and lived in the wilderness of Maon. And when Saul heard that, he pursued David in the wilderness. Saul went on one side of the mountain, and David and his men were on the other side of the mountain. And David was hurrying to get away from Saul, and Saul and his men were closing in on David and his men to capture them. So Saul and his army are on one side, David and his smaller army on the other side, and they're working their way around this mountain. And this makes me think of Peter Pan. And if it doesn't make you think of Peter Pan, probably you haven't read it recently. But when you, the reader, are first brought into Neverland, not that this matters at all, but it's just in my head, so now it's in yours. When you're first brought into Neverland as the reader, you see the Lost Boys going around the edge of the island, and behind the Lost Boys come all the pirates looking for them, and behind the pirates come Tick-Tock Croc looking for the pirates, and they're all pursuing each other around the island and never catching up to each other, and that's kind of what's happening here with Saul and David, although Peter Pan is fiction and this is not. So verse 27 says, a messenger came to Saul and said, hurry and come down, for the Philistines have made a raid against the land. So Saul returned from pursuing after David and went against the Philistines. Therefore, that place was called the Rock of Escape, right? So Saul's marching around the mountain to get David, and then Saul has to go and fight the Philistines. Now, David wrote the 54th Psalm at this point as he's hiding out in this wilderness. And it says this, O God, save me by your name and vindicate me by your might. O God, hear my prayer and give ear to the words of my mouth. For strangers have risen against me. Ruthless men seek my life. They do not set God before themselves. So who are the strangers? Who are the ruthless men? Probably the Ziphites. These are the people who've just decided to hand David over. Behold, God is my helper. The Lord is the upholder of my life. He will return the evil to my enemies. In your faithfulness, put an end to them. With a freewill offering, I sacrifice to you. I will give thanks to your name, O Lord, for it is good. For he has delivered me from every trouble, and my eye has looked in triumph on my enemies. So this is when David makes his escape from Saul in this place. Now, after Saul is done chasing the Philistines, he comes back to his pursuit of David. And now we're in 1 Samuel 24. When Saul returned from following the Philistines, he was told, behold, David is in the wilderness at En-Gedi. And Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all of Israel, and they went to seek David and his men in front of the wild goats rock. And I wish things were still named like that. That would be fun. Like, oh yeah, down there by the wild goats rock. Yeah. Like, let's do that. Let's all agree that we're going to start naming things. Go out to your property, pick it, and just name it something, because I think that's more interesting. So anyway, verse 3. Saul came to the sheepfold by the way where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the inmost parts of the cave. So here's the situation. Saul has his 3,000 men. David and his men have gone into this cave to hide. David and his 600 men, they're in the very back of the cave. Saul, the king, doesn't want to relieve himself in front of everybody, so he ducks into the cave. He's like, excuse me, everybody. And it's funny because it says Saul went to relieve himself. Some translations, and maybe your footnote will say this, is it says that Saul covered his feet. So the idea is he's squatting and he's taking care of business, right? He's covering his feet with his clothes. He's going to be there for a while. This isn't, a quick visit. And so listen to what happens here. Verse 4, the men of David said to him, here is the day of which the Lord has said, behold, I will give your enemy into your hand. You shall do to him as shall seem good to you. So they're like, look, here's the king. He's right here in the cave. All 600 of us are in here. Now's your chance. Kill him. And David arose and stealthily cut off a corner of Saul's robe. We skip over this verse way too quickly. I need you to think about what's happening here. Saul is doing his business. He's squatting down. He's got his feet covered. And David creeps up behind him, comes up and cuts off a piece of Saul's robe. Do you know how close you have to be? I want you to think about this when you go to the bathroom next time, about how close David was, right? Like, this is close. Granted, it's in a cave. It's probably dark. Anyway, it's just a crazy scene. David goes up, cuts off a corner of his robe, and then look at how guilty David feels over that motion, that one thing. Verse 5, afterward, David's heart struck him because he had cut off Saul's robe. And he said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, to the Lord's anointed, to put out my hand against him, seeing that he is the Lord's anointed. Now listen, Saul was anointed king by Samuel. Saul was anointed king by God, declared king by God. And David says, I will not put my hand against the Lord's anointed. And David is struck in his heart for even cutting a piece of the robe off. He feels guilty about that. Like, I shouldn't have done that. He goes, that wasn't the right thing to do. So David persuaded his men with these words and did not permit them to attack Saul. And Saul arose and left the cave and went on his way. Afterward, David arose and went out of the cave and called after Saul, "My lord the king." When Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the earth and paid homage. And David said to Saul, "Why are you listening to the words of men who say, 'Behold, David seeks your harm'? Behold, this day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you today in my hand in the cave. And some told me to kill you, but I spared you, saying, 'I will not put my hand against the Lord, my lord the king, for he is the Lord's anointed.' See, my father, see the corner of your robe in my hand, for by the fact that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you, you may know and see that there is no wrong or treason in my hand. I have not sinned against you, though you hunt my life to take it." So he holds up this piece of fabric and goes, "Look, I cut off a piece of your robe." And, Saul looks and is like, "Okay, man, I get it." And then David says, "May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge me against you, but my hand will not be against you." So I need you to hear this too. David we already saw it in the Psalm, we saw it in the Psalms from yesterday and the day before. David wants to see his enemy's downfall, but David is not willing to be the person who will do it. So catch that. We've seen it in the Psalms. David is writing about the fact that he wants to see the downfall of his enemies, his enemy being Saul. And he says, "I won't do it. I won't lift my hand against the Lord's anointed." And I need you to catch this, because it sounds like what David's saying is like, look, I'm not going to harm you. I'm not upset with you. That's not exactly the case. David is saying, God anointed you to be king, so I won't put my hand out against you. But he goes, but I hope that God puts his hand out against you. That's what David is conveying to the king. Let's look at verse 12 again. "May the Lord judge between me and you, and may the Lord avenge me against you. But my hand shall not be against you." It's not that David is wanting Saul to be spared. It's that David refused to do anything to Saul because he recognizes that God anointed Saul as king. He's like, "I'll let God deal with you." And I think that's, I don't know, I love that idea that David is unwilling to be the one who handles it. He's like, "I'm going to let God handle it." As the proverb of the ancients say, "Out of the wicked comes wickedness, but my hand shall not be against you." So this is another knock at King Saul. Out of the wicked comes wickedness. He goes, "You're behaving wickedly." He goes, "But my hand won't be against you. You're pursuing me, but I won't be against you. I'll let God deal with that. God will deal with you." After whom, and then he continues his tirade or whatever. He says, "After whom has the king of Israel come out? After whom do you pursue? I'm only a dead dog. I'm only a flea," or after a dead dog, after a flea. "May the Lord therefore be judge and give sentence between me and you, and see to it and plead my cause and deliver me from your hand." So he's hoping that God's hand will be against Saul, and he's hoping that God will deliver himself, David, from Saul. As soon as David had finished speaking these words to Saul, Saul said, "Is this your voice, my son David?" And Saul lifted up his voice and wept. And he said to David, "You are more righteous than I, for you have repaid me good, whereas I have repaid you with evil. And you have declared this day how you dealt well with me, in that you did not kill me when the Lord put me into your hands." Now, look at this. When the Lord put me into your hands, let's go back up here, back up to chapter 23. Saul sought David every day, but God did not give him over into his hands. And then down here, he says, "You delivered me, even though you didn't kill me, even though God put me into your hands. For if a man finds his enemy, will he let him go away safe? So may the Lord reward you with good for what you have done to me this day. And now behold, I know that you shall surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hands." So Saul is recognizing, okay, God's going to make you king. "Swear to me, therefore, by the Lord, that you will not cut off my offspring after me, and that you will not destroy my name out of my father's house." So he says, "Look, promise me that you won't kill my children." And David swore this to Saul, and then Saul went home, and David and his men went up to the stronghold. So Saul, it seems like at this point, is like, all right, I'm done hunting David. I'm done with that. God is going to give him the kingdom. And yet Saul is not done with that. And Saul is not done pursuing David, and David will yet again spare his life. Join us tomorrow. Read ahead if you want to in 1 Samuel 25, 26, and 27. And it'll be a little bit of a longer one, but episode 82, 1 Samuel 25, 26, 27, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much for journeying with us today at Simpler Bible. Together, you and I have looked at another passage of Scripture and come to know the Bible a little bit better and enjoy God more fully. This video, along with all of our videos, can be found at simplerbible.com, where you can enjoy our Through the Bible in a Year course. You can also enjoy a wealth of resources, blog posts that take you a little bit deeper into the text, a Bible study format that you can use with your small groups or your family, and we're creating new content all the time, all with the commitment to help us be people who know and enjoy God more fully. Thank you so much for being part of it, and we can't wait to see you next time.